Hello class 9 students, this is the continuation part of the chapter photosynthesis. In my previous video I started talking about the different components of photosynthesis and their role in the process of photosynthesis. I have talked about the four major components, carbon dioxide, chlorophyll, sunlight and water. So the three components that I've already talked about are carbon dioxide, chlorophyll and water, and I hope those things are clear to you all. Next, today I will start talking about the last and the another important component of photosynthesis, which is sunlight. Okay, now look at your book, page number 55, point number 3 here, but I am discussing it last. It's not an issue, you can write any in any order. So as photosynthesis is a light dependent process, we all know that without light photosynthesis will not take place. It takes place only during daytime because sunlight is the only source of light in nature. Artificial light may also initiate photosynthesis, but the intensity of that artificial light has to be very high. Means we cannot just think that our the tube lights that we use at our home will initiate photosynthesis. No, it needs a very intense light. If it is an artificial light, so it needs to be very intense. Okay. Next, role of photosynthesis. The other part of this paragraph is not at all required, so directly move on to the role of photosynthesis. Sunlight supplies radiant energy to initiate the process of photosynthesis. Second point, chlorophyll molecule absorb solar energy and become activated. This I have already told you, already have discussed how this happens while I was talking about the role of chlorophyll. Third point, solar energy is converted into chemical energy in the process of photosynthesis. This chemical energy is stored as potential energy in food and becomes available for the living beings. The formation of ATP from Adp and Pi. So we all know what ATP is, adenosine triphosphate. Now how is this ATP formed? ATP is formed when ADP, adenosine diphosphate, combines with Pi. Now what is Pi? Inorganic phosphate. So when one inorganic phosphate is added to it, so diphosphate becomes triphosphate. From 2 it becomes 3. The amount of phosphates in this molecule becomes 3 when one inorganic phosphate is added here. Thus it becomes ATP, adenosine triphosphate. Now this also takes place in the presence of light, and this process is known as photophosphorylation. Sunlight. This process is known as photophosphorylation. So this one, point number 5, is very important. Okay, the formation of ATP from ADP and Pi with the help of sunlight is termed as photophosphorylation. Light energy also helps in splitting up of water molecules into H plus and OH minus. This I have told in the previous video that during this process of photosynthesis, H2O, water, is broken down into H plus and OH minus ions, H plus and OH minus ions, and this also takes place in presence of sunlight, and this process is known as photolysis of water. So photolysis of water and photophosphorylation are very important for 1 mark questions. Okay, and these equations are not given in the book, both for photophosphorylation and photolysis of water. I am asking you to write down these equations in your book where this photophosphorylation and photolysis are there. Write at the top white portion, write these equations. So when you are asked what is photolysis of water or what is photophosphorylation, you, along with the definition, you will give these equations. Okay, without the equation I will have to deduct marks. Now moving on to the next topic. This topic is related to sunlight only. You will find the heading in page number 56, absorption and action spectra. Spectra is basically the plural form of spectrum. Okay, photosynthetic pigments absorb light energy only from the visible part of the spectrum, only from the visible part of the light that we can see. So these photosynthetic pigments like the chlorophyll A and chlorophyll B, xanthophyll, all the different type of photosynthetic pigments we have talked about in the previous class, these pigments, they absorb light energy from the visible part of light spectrum only. Okay, next, see, next paragraph, different plant pigments absorb different wavelengths of light, and these wavelengths are not absorbed at the same rate. So different pigments are there, as I have already said, and they absorb light energy at different wavelengths. Okay, and these wavelengths are not absorbed at the same rate. Different pigments absorb different light, the light at different wavelengths, and they absorb it at different rates. Now the curve, listen to this very, very clearly, the curve that is obtained by plotting the amount of absorption of different wavelengths of light by a particular pigment is known as absorption spectrum. I will show you by drawing a graph. Okay. Suppose this is a graph, and this is the curve that is obtained. See, look at the book again. A curve that is obtained by plotting the amount of absorption of different wavelengths. Suppose here is one point, here is another point, here is another point, and by joining these points we are getting this curve. What are these points? The amount of absorption. Suppose this pigment can absorb this much of light. These are the pigments. On this line we are plotting the pigments, and this is the amount of light absorbed. So this pigment can absorb this much amount of light. This one can absorb this much, this one can absorb this much, and this one can absorb this much. So by joining all these points we get a curve, and this curve is known as absorption spectrum. Now what is the action spectrum? The absorption spectrum of the chlorophyll A indicates that these pigments absorb quanta from the blue and red region. So you don't have to read all these things, just one line definition of absorption spectra from a curve till absorption spectrum of that pigment. That will be enough for the definition. Now move on to action spectrum. Now what is action spectrum? The curve showing the rate of photosynthesis at different wavelengths of light is known as action spectrum. Now when we plot the points, what do these points indicate? The different wavelengths of light. These different wavelengths of light perform photosynthesis at different rate, because for photosynthesis light is needed, and different wavelengths of light will perform photosynthesis at different rates. So now if we plot the points in a graph, by joining the curve we will get an action spectrum. Remember, action means something is happening. Okay, and photosynthesis is a process. So by plotting the rate of photosynthesis at different wavelengths of light, that is known as the action spectrum. Something is happening. To plot the rate of photosynthesis, that is action spectrum. But to plot the rate of absorption of light by different pigments is known as absorption spectrum. Okay, so I hope this part is clear to you all. You will have to learn the definition of absorption and action spectra from book, one line definition, but it is very, very important. Okay, in the next video I will start with the mechanism of photosynthesis, and there you will get to know more about this process. Okay, thank you.